Merci, Mary.
Thank you, Mary. Hello, everyone. Yes, it's a great time to put on your headsets to follow along for these presentation in both languages. So it's always a pleasure for me to be with you. And once again today, we've covered a lot of ground together for the past 4 years with Mary, with your representatives, and always as well with the Prime Minister. We have faced commercial challenges, trade challenges, weather challenges as well, and it was always important for us to work together.
We formed government. Every time an important decision had to be taken regarding agriculture, our Prime Minister has always been there, looking for the best ways to support our farmers and ranchers, while you were going through trade challenges, extreme weather events, and also to give you the tools you need to be more resilient, sustainable, productive, and competitive. We know to feed Canadians and the world and to ensure the economic vitality of our rural communities and our country, we must make sure that our farmers and ranchers thrive, and our Prime Minister gets it. Please welcome the Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau. I can start. He is in the hotel I've seen. I know where he is, don't worry. Okay, we'll take questions. No, just for fun. But seriously, I mean, it's been 4 years for Mary and I working with you. I really appreciate the collaboration we have. It is very important for my team to stay in contact on a regular basis. And it is even more important to be in the field with you. The best part of my job is to visit you, to see how you're doing, what is the reality, how we can best support you.
And that really is the most enjoyable part. I have just been on a tour in southern Ontario from Niagara to Guelph, and I've met with producers, processors, scientists, food bankers, and we have an exemplary food system here in Canada. We have people who are passionate, who are competent, who help each other out. We work together well, and that has to continue. I think that that's the key to success. We have challenges with the climate crisis, which is quite real.
Really is real. And we are, I think, working hard to support you in different ways and making sure that you keep being very productive and very competitive. So on that note, please welcome the Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau.
Bonjour tout le monde. Merci pour.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that, and thank you, Marie-Claude, for the introduction. I know that it is sometimes, it's not really a challenge to ask a politician to speak longer.
To get here. Now, you probably don't know this, but Marie-Claude sits right beside me at the cabinet table. Which means whenever an issue comes up regarding agriculture or regarding rural families or regarding just about anything that matters to you, she is right there leaning in, reminding me of the things that matter most to the community across the country. And I really, really have to say, you are all lucky to have her in your corner, and I'm grateful to have her fighting for you every day. Thank you for everything you do, Marie-Claude. Glad to be here as well with MPs Cody Blois and Francis Drouin, the Parliamentary Secretary. And I want to also begin by taking a moment to thank Mary Robinson for her leadership as president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. Mary, you've led this organization through an unprecedented 4 years, everything from the pandemic to potato wart, I know that's something you were aware of, to problems with supply chains and global food insecurity. I want to welcome Keith Currie to the role, and our government looks forward to working with you, Keith. Before I begin, I also want to celebrate that earlier today, alongside the Government of Saskatchewan, we announced that families in Saskatchewan will have $10 a day childcare starting next month, saving them up to an average of $573 a month per child compared to 2 years ago. I know a lot of you grew up on and run family farms, so you know how important it is to be there for families through thick and thin, and we will, of course, keep up that work. To the farmers, producers, farm groups, co-ops, and more who make up the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, thank you for having me here today, and thank you for everything that you do. You grow the crops and raise the livestock that feed Canada and feed the world. Across Canada this morning, people are fueling their days with yogurt from Quebec dairy farmers, fruit from BC orchards, egg from Ontario poultry farmers, and kids across the country are packing their lunchboxes with sandwiches that have bread made with prairie grains, vegetables from a local greenhouse, and roast beef from an Alberta cattle ranch. This is some of the best food in the world, and it's produced by you, the farmers of Canada. Most of you on family farms that have been around for generations. Il y a 2 semaines,
2 weeks ago, I participated in a public discussion with the UPA in Longueuil, and I heard the voices of Quebec farmers. People like Stéphane, a dairy producer from Lanaudière, who is concerned about the next generation in his family farm. Catherine, who produces maple syrup and who has to deal with labor shortages. Daniel, a grains producer who has trouble dealing with the working costs on farm. Farmers are facing real challenges. We all want to be there for you. We want to be there so that you can continue to produce the quality food that you produce whilst remaining resilient.
It's an increasingly urgent issue for farmers. You are on the front lines. When extreme weather strikes, it hits your bottom lines directly. Hurricane Fiona damaged barns, orchards, and fields, destroying crops and killing cattle. PEI lost an estimated third of its fruit trees. That's a shocking number. Au cours des dernières années,
over the past few years, you have been through droughts, floods, forest fires. We've invested close to $1 billion to help this sector to lessen the consequences of climate change and to reduce emissions. Growing seasons are changing, dry spells, floods are multiplying, and we have to adapt. Farmers are at the front line of climate change, but they are also leaders when it comes time to finding solutions. Just think of practices such as the hedgerows and ground-covering crops. You can be more efficient, more productive by managing nutrients and by using precision strategies such as GPS and drones. And in order to support you in your work, we are making major investments in programs such as the on-farm program for climate and the program with clean technologies in agriculture. Our goal is to help farmers, scientists, and Indigenous groups to adopt sustainable practices. We all are looking for the same thing: clean air, clean water, soil, and animals that are healthy and abundance for decades to come.
Change, and a whole lot of other things. On top of that, there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation you may be reading online that's adding to your worries. I was at a town hall in Langley, BC just last Thursday, where Cade asked me why we were, quote, mandating a 30% reduction in fertilizer. I want to be as clear with you as I was with him. We are consulting with farmers in the industry about a voluntary, not mandatory, reduction in emissions from fertilizers, not in use of fertilizers. I've heard directly from you that finding ways to use fertilizer more efficiently is important, both for the sustainability and resilience of our environment and of your bottom lines. La durabilité, c'est aussi
Sustainability is also financial sustainability. We know that farmers are dealing with different realities from many other Canadians, and that's the reason why we just announced the Canadian Partnership for Sustainable Agriculture with all of the provinces and territories that will start being implemented on April 1st. This is an investment worth $3.5 billion. It's a 25% increase compared to the last partnership, and it was created based on the priorities that you expressed yourselves. After the cutbacks in the previous government, we chose to reinvigorate the business risk management programs in order to offer you better coverage.
Technologies and practices that are not just good for the environment, but also good for your bottom line. Our price on pollution is in place to reduce emissions and fight climate change, and it puts money back in Canadians' pockets, including farmers in places that use the federal system. That's why, for farmers specifically, we've exempted gasoline and diesel for farm use from pollution pricing. And for eligible farms in backstop jurisdictions, we've brought in tax credits for things like propane and natural gas use. In addition, families that live in rural communities, like farm families, get a 10% top-up to their climate action incentive payments that come in 4 times a year. We've also provided funding to help farmers invest in clean technologies that reduce your energy costs, like helping farmers purchase more efficient grain dryers. But there's also an ongoing reality around high global inflation and interest rates that are hitting you all hard. Supply chain disruptions and Putin's illegal war have driven up the price of essential inputs. Most concerningly, global food prices went up when Russia weaponized food and prevented the export of grain that vulnerable countries were relying on. It was a cruelty on an unfathomable scale and was more evidence of just how essential farmers' contributions are. Canada is doing its part to support farmers in Ukraine, but we know this global situation is affecting Canadian farmers too. Simply put, farming is getting more expensive. Well, programs like the Advanced Payments Program provide low and interest-free loans so you can afford things like fuel, fertilizer, and seed. And I want to note that we raised the interest-free limit to $250,000 for last year and this year. I've heard your concerns, and our government is constantly looking at more ways we can keep being there for you. We offer generous programs, and we want to make sure that they're responding to the needs of smaller family farms and younger farmers as well. The previous government's track record on agriculture is one of budget cuts, but we believe in supporting you, not taking you for granted, and that's why we'll keep investing in agriculture. On sait que le meilleur moyen d'assurer la...
We know that the best way to ensure long-term success for Canadian farmers is to help your businesses to prosper. You need more workers in order to grow your businesses, and this is why we have increased our immigration targets, and we are prolonging, and we are also offering temporary work permits to the families of workers, and we're listening to your ideas to try to dampen these shortfalls. We want to have resilient farms with road and rail systems that will allow you to transport your products to markets throughout Canada and throughout the world.
Trade agreements with 51 countries, representing nearly 2/3 of global GDP. And in 2022, agriculture and agri-food exports reached a record high of almost $93 billion, shattering our target of $75 billion by 2025, years ahead of schedule. To build on this momentum, as part of our Indo-Pacific strategy, we're opening our first ever agriculture and agri-food office in Asia. As Asian populations and economies grow, they'll need more Canadian canola, Canadian pork, and all kinds of high-quality Canadian products. And we're taking action to make sure Canada remains a supplier of choice. We want to support the stability of the sector here at home as well. Supply management is a guarantee of quality and a guarantee of stability for the next generation. It's a system that has worked very well for over 40 years and that will continue to work. When we renegotiated NAFTA, we got a good deal for the entire Canadian economy. But because the President was specifically targeting dairy farmers in particular, we had to compensate producers in the supply management sectors to get the right deal. We have now delivered full and fair compensation to dairy, egg, and poultry farmers, and I promise that Canadians that never again will Canada's supply management system be up for negotiation in trade deals. There's a bill in the House of Commons right now that would enshrine this into law and ensure future governments respect this promise. Supply management is important not only for dairy farmers, but for the entire agricultural community because it provides stability that their communities and the sector more broadly can count on. As farmers, you work the land, you raise the animals, you feed Canada, you feed the world. You love what you do. It's tough work and it's essential work. And every Canadian is grateful. We've seen over the past years, through the pandemic, through the anxieties around supply chains, just how, unfortunately, too many of us take for granted the hard work that you do every single day. Canadians are beginning to understand more than ever before how important it is to be able to rely on local, high-quality Canadian producers of the food that they rely on, of the goods they want to support their families with, of how we build a stronger economy and a stronger future for everyone. Ça prend plus d'agriculteurs.
We need more farmers. We need to ensure that the next generation is there to continue to produce the foods of quality that are the reputation of Canada. We need to have a good future for the next generation.
Get up and hearing from all of you, because as leaders, it's important to have a dialogue with the people that we choose to serve, so we can be there with what you need for today and into the future, to strengthen our family farms and build a stronger, more resilient, more inclusive agricultural sector as a vibrant part of an economy that works for all Canadians. Looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much for including me today. Merci. First hand to go up, right there. No, you in the back, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm a farmer and a certified crop advisor from the Ottawa Valley. Taking care of our land is central to growing a healthy crop and our livelihoods. We want to help Canada meet our environmental targets, but we need to be able to access affordable fertilizer, innovations, and working capital to do so. Essentially, we can't be green if we're in the red. Are you and your team considering economic sustainability as part of your decision-making?
Absolutely. No, thank you for your question and your hard work. I mean, it's one of those things that we've seen time and time again. You know how important it is to care for and sustain the land that has sustained you and sustained all of us for generations. We know things are changing. We know the way we do things needs to change. We also know all of us need to make sure you are supported through this time of change. Absolutely. We need to be working with you to create the innovations and the solutions that are not only going to protect your land and this country and the environment for future generations, but also going to protect your ability to continue to be successful in working the land and pass it on to future generations. So yes, that's why we've put forward, for example, the strategy on agricultural partnerships that is focused on sustainable agriculture. $3.5 billion with the provinces and territories over the coming years to make sure that we're looking at the right technologies, the best way of doing things. all of you know that being able to target your fertilizer use better is really important because it keeps costs down and it increases or maximizes yields. And that is absolutely something we need. We can't have yields be going down. We have to be increasing them. We have to make sure we're able to feed not just Canadians, but the world. You need to be able to do that. That's why, whether it's looking at how we're bringing down the price of fertilizer or supporting you during this difficult time where the cost of Russian fertilizers have gone up because of their decisions to invade Ukraine, making sure we're there to support you in various ways, but making sure we're also there for the kinds of technological innovations that are going to be a key part of making sure the world can feed itself in a net zero economy in 2050. So yes, we will be there as we continue to support you doing the amazing and important work you continue to do. Merci. Another question, maybe we'll go for over that side. Yeah. You, sir, stand up. Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister Trudeau. And thank you for all the work you've done through the pandemic and supporting the industry. It's vital for us accessing markets domestically, but also internationally. You talked to supply chains and the challenges we faced. Transport Canada came out with some sound recommendations on supporting us moving forward. Where do you see and how do you see the government supporting us, especially now as we look at our infrastructure across the country, but also the ongoing challenges of access to containers with costs still high coming into the country where we're seeing the rest of the world start to drop? And sorry, Ron Lemaire from the Canadian Produce Marketing Association.
Thank you, Ron. I was gonna start with that. Yeah. First of all, it is a good thing that Canada has such strong agricultural production across the country. We do not have the population to be able to not export, and it's a good thing that we export. We need to continue to export around the world because the world needs good Canadian products. The world needs to be able to be reliable, have reliable sources of grain and high quality food that is produced increasingly in uncertain ways around the world, but people can and should know that when there is a maple leaf on that box, it's a guarantor of quality, not just in terms of quality of the product, but quality of how it was grown, how it was processed, how people are paid throughout it. I mean, that is something that is increasingly more and more important to companies and clients and consumers around the world. But the challenge of getting our goods to markets overseas is huge. It's not just about piercing it, it's about actually getting the shipping down too. So whether it's rail infrastructure, road infrastructure, or ports, we've made significant investments in trade corridors and are going to continue to. We all remember the challenges that have happened over the previous years around rail bottlenecks, around increase in oil by rail that has reduced the amount of grain by rail, for example. Those are things that led us to, among other things, purchase the TMX pipelines to make sure that there are proper alternatives to be able to export our fossil fuels to more markets than just the United States. But we need to do more in ensuring that you have reliable shipping facilities, reliable processing facilities that you can count on, and access to those markets in a way that isn't going to be interrupted to make people turn to a different supplier because there is a bottleneck in the Canadian rail system or something. We've seen it time and time again where we work really, really hard to develop new markets, and then a year or two in, there's a jam in the system, and then they turn away for another market and will never come back to Canadian produce. We have to make sure we are continuing to be extraordinarily active, not just on signing trade deals. I mean, we're a government over the past 8 years or so has signed massive amounts of trade deals, including renegotiating NAFTA, including CPTPP, including CETA with Europe. We now are the only G7 country that has a free trade deal with every other G7 country. Huge access to vast swaths of the global economy. But that does us no good to have access on paper if we're not getting it in practice. That's why we're continuing to invest in transportation infrastructure and on making sure that your shippers can be as reliable as we all know that you are for producing. Thank you. Another question. Oui, ici en avant.
Hi. Keisha Rose Topic, the president of the PEI Federation of Agriculture.
What's your first name again, sorry?
Keisha, and also farmer. In the agriculture industry, we face many challenges to be sustainable and resilient, as you have said, and we appreciate the government's commitment to helping us face these challenges for our industry. One challenge that has come to the forefront in recent years is the relationship with CFIA and the agriculture community has started to affect our resiliency. CFIA has always been a highly respected regulatory agency, and to continue that reputation and credibility and to have the trust of Canadians and internationally, we are dependent on CFIA to adhere to their values of making science-based decisions and meeting international standards. Will the federal government stand behind Canadian farmers and listen to international scientific experts and allow Canadian products to receive fair market access?
The answer is yes. We will always ground ourselves in science and in data. Because as you say, it's extraordinarily important that people in Canada, across the country, and around the world continue to have confidence in products from Canada. If there are stories or examples of genuine challenges with Canadian products that can not only affect one product, but the entire reputation of a sector, that's a very, very bad thing for all of us. So grounding ourselves in science and communicating that, establishing that trust with consumers around the world is going to be essential. And the way to do that is to ground it in science, to make sure we're doing everything we possibly can. Now, there are always going to be situations, whether it's around pesticides, whether it's around gene editing, whether it's around potato worts, where there are going to be very strongly held views on either side of a very thin line that science tries to provide. And what we're going to be doing every step of the way is working with producers, working with customers, working with the scientific community at home and around the world, and making sure that the decisions we're taking are the best ones in the moment, but also for the long term. Sometimes it means making difficult decisions, but every step of the way, what CFIA is focused on and what it needs to remain focused on, and your inputs and your participation in that is going to be really important, has to be on making sure of the long-term viability of Canadian agriculture and our export of that agriculture to the world, agricultural products to the world. Thank you for your question, Keisha. Another question. Yeah, you in the blue.
Merci, bonjour. Thank you. Hello, Mr. Trudeau. I'm Julie Bissonnette. I am a dairy producer, and I am close to Montreal in Quebec. And as you said earlier, the next generation, young farmers, the cost of inputs, inflation, and all of that are concerns. And young farmers talked to you about that 2 weeks ago. They feel the pressure. Young farmers are saying maybe we'll wait 1 year to decide what will happen for the future with the farm. That's a cause for concern. So what is your answer to try to reassure the young farmers? Thank you. Well, firstly, we have to recognize that we are going through a very difficult period. Inflation currently, interest rates are very high, and we know that what the challenges are for supply chains that were completely turned upside down with the war in Europe, with the pandemic, and we know that we are going through a very difficult period, especially for young people, for small businesses, for small family farms. And this is the reason why we are working with Marie-Claude in order to see what kind of help we can offer at this point in time in order to get through this difficult period. Because I think that everyone here understands that there are good years, there are bad years, but if there is a very bad year or too many bad years in a row, then that's not sustainable. And we are currently going through one of these periods where we have to be there to help family farms and small businesses. We have to encourage that next generation playing such an important role. So the challenge for us is, in a situation of very high inflation, we can't just simply inject a lot of money into the economy as a whole to help everyone, because that will only contribute to inflation even more. So we have to be more targeted in our efforts. We have to see how we can help out those who have the most difficulty right now, to convince them that they should hang on. We're not talking about hanging on for 5 years here, or even 3 years, really. We know that we are already seeing a return. Even though the worldwide economy has slowed down, we are seeing a return toward prosperity. We are seeing the end of this very painful downturn for everyone. A little bit less painful for Canada because of many of the advantages that we have, but knowing that it's less painful doesn't really change anything for a family that's having trouble paying the bills. And knowing that it's worse in Europe, or it's worse in the US, or worse elsewhere, doesn't really help when a family is having trouble currently. But what I can tell you is that because we know that better days are coming in the next few years, we can make sure that we are there to support those who need that support right now. And we also see a growing awareness among all of the Canadian consumers. Canadian consumers understand how important it is to support our rural communities, our farm families. That is part of our very identity. It's part of our heritage. It's part of our priorities and values as Canadians. Sometimes we seem to take that for granted, but as I said, this pandemic, this fear about supply chains, about the reliability of these supply chains, we know that we can count on each other in Canada. We're going to continue to be there, and I hope that this pride that young farmers feel in contributing, this pride is essential to the well-being of all Canadians, and that is recognized by governments with investments to support them, and all Canadians are so proud to consume Canadian products, and I hope that that will encourage as many young farmers as possible to tough it out through these difficult times, because we know that they will benefit in years to come. Thank you. Question at the back.
Sure. Yep. Stand up.
Thanks for coming today.
So what's your name, sir?
Sorry, Tyler Fulton with Canadian Cattle Association. When I heard that there was an opportunity maybe that we would have a chance to ask you a question, I went to my consultants, which are my teenage kids and my wife, and so this is what they came up with. So farmers and ranchers love the land and work hard to protect it, and consider it our legacy for future generations. Grasslands capture carbon, increase biodiversity, and add resiliency to the landscape, but we need help. Grasslands in Canada and around the world are shrinking due to market forces. More and more cattle producers, cattle and all livestock producers, are moving to more lucrative uses of the land. So will the government of Canada lead the world by providing incentives for livestock producers to continue protecting grasslands?
That's a great question, Tyler, and I'll admit that it's not something that I spent a lot of time reflecting on. Actually, can you give the mic back to Tyler so I can follow up a little bit? What are some of the things that you think as a cattle rancher would be most helpful in terms, because I absolutely agree, protecting grasslands, really important. What is the best way of doing it that would be most efficient, that would really help cattle ranchers like yourself to not switch away from that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to really the recognition of the value that those grasslands bring. So in particular, the biodiversity outcomes that come from having those natural landscapes, it's a question, I guess, back to society at large, whether or not we value that. Because if we do, I can't think of another mechanism that's going to maintain those grasslands if we don't figure out a way to put an incentive in place to maintain them, because there's so many strong incentives to take them out.
Well, listen, one of the things that I think of directly, and that's really helpful, Tyler, we just signed on, or we just actually led as a country at COP15 on protecting biodiversity, protecting nature. Everyone knows about the climate change COPs. The last one was in Egypt. But in Montreal, we had COP15 on protecting nature, protecting biodiversity. And the goal we set for ourselves, 25% protected lands and of our ocean and coastal areas by 2025, 30% by 2030. And that's a target that the world shares. I'll be honest, in the first few years, we were able to make a huge leap forward. We came into office in 2015 with about 1% of our coastal areas and oceans protected, and we bumped it up to close to 15%, and we're on our way to 25% and 30%. On land, it's a little more challenging, partially because federal government has more direct control over oceans than it does over land, which is all provincial areas. But getting to that 25% protected land areas by 2025 and 30% by 2030 is going to require that, as you say, Tyler, that we put a real value on the ecosystem services, on the biodiversity, on the healthy ecosystems and diverse ecosystems that we actually have in those areas, and looking at how we can actually create mechanisms and support that recognize that we can't make 30% of our country national parks, for example. We have to make sure that we're looking at mixed use, that there are some areas where you do certain things and others where you don't. And the kinds of grasslands we have across this country are worthy of protecting, and the more we actually do put value intrinsic in them and not just say the value of a land is only what you can then aggressively extract from it. That's a shift in thinking that doesn't surprise me to see your kids nudging you along that way, because it's part of what a lot of the next generation is challenging us to do, to think as society in a way that all of you do naturally, which is thinking a little more long-term about things, thinking about one generation to the next and not trying to maximize profits for the next 6 months or the next quarter or the next 5 years. That reflection is something that we can and must fold in a lot more, and I look forward to more of your ideas and working with all of you on how we do that. Thank you, Tyler. Another question. Yeah, you in the middle there, in the black. Yep. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Sukhbal Ball, cherry grower from Kelowna, BC, and you may recognize the name Chanchel, may ring a bell from many years ago. But yeah, I thought
he grew the best spinach. No, it was a spinach from
we enjoyed a nice sog, which is the
sog,
spinach
that's
my
right.
mother.
That's a great story. I'll tell it, but you give your question and then I'll go off on my tangents.
Well, mine is actually more just a comment for just a general discussion for people to take back when they go home and to their respective areas. What crosses my mind is how our public views agriculture at the current state. Many years ago, everybody had a connection to agriculture. My uncle had a farm, or we have a farm. But what I've seen is that connection is going away. So the grocery store is that main point for a lot of people. So and I'm just a few years removed from the technical young farmer category, so I've now moved into the regular farmer age bracket. But we have young farmers that are here today. So what I would just maybe like to hear some comment from yourself is, how do we get back to that value of agriculture as being a priority? Because I watched your speeches daily when we went through this unprecedented COVID time, and it took several days, I can't remember exactly, but then the word farmer came out of your mouth, and I would say, oh, listen, he's now talking about farming, which is essential, and I think that discussion needs to continue forward. So I'd be happy to just hear your thoughts on how we get the next generation involved.
Well, one of the running gags about Quebecers is all Quebecers are like 2 or 3 generations removed from the farm, which is why Agriculture Matters is such a political driver of things in Quebec in ways that it isn't always in every other place of the country. My grandfather grew up on my great-grandfather's farm, and that's something that is within generational memory for many, many Canadians. But at the same time, we have to remember that Canada is one of the most urbanized countries in the world. 150 years ago, when we started as a country, we were 20% urban and 80% rural. That is now completely flipped, that we are 80% urban and 20% rural. However, the mindset that we're beginning to see now, as Canadians are thinking about how to stay healthy, how to be conscious about how we're raising our kids, how we're feeding them the best possible things, how we're taking care of our own bodies, how we're aware of provenance, we're aware of organic, we're aware of local, we're going to more farmers markets. I think there is a swing back towards an appreciation for the unbelievably important role that agriculture and rural communities provide in the daily life of every single Canadian. One of the things we saw through the pandemic and that we're increasing to see as telecommunications and broadband is increasingly accessible everywhere across the country. Lots more work to do in rural areas, as I heard when I was out in Langley from a number of people with big questions on that. But there is a desire for the kind of quality of life that you get when you step away from the cities. We are seeing a shift of the things that are actually valued in our lives and the things we want for our kids and the way we want to raise our families that is actually shifting and doing that shift away from. So it's not about looking back to a few generations before when we had connections to the land in that way. It's about actually looking a few generations forward to how do we make sure we are continuing to be connected to the land, connected to how we are integrated into our environment and not a separate piece from the environment. And that's part of a shift in attitude that we see when young people are deciding, not to get their driver's license, not to go out and buy a car. They want a great bike instead, and they want to save up money to travel instead of saving up to buy a car, as so many kids in cities are able to do. Now, you can't do that in rural areas at this point. The transportation is still not there. But there is a shift in priorities that I think bodes well for the connection people will have and the value people will see for your industry, for agricultural families, what they do. The story around the spinach and the sag actually was that there was a kind of I guess it was spinach seed that was brought over from India 100 years ago by one of the early settlers into the Okanagan from the Punjab that got bred out and lost in India. And the kind of spinach that was grown here in Canada was true to the authentic stuff that you couldn't find anymore in India. So we actually were a bit of a seed bank for some of the original settlers. And I thought it was always a lovely story that in Kelowna was a place where the diversity of Canada actually managed to protect something that was otherwise lost. And I think that's something that we all can think of applications in our lives. I think there's time for one last question. Where haven't I gone? Maybe the very back. Okay, yes, you in the black behind find the fellow in the black I called last time. There you are. I saw you being disappointed when I...
Of all days to our Navy. Thank you so much for coming to speak, to address Canadian farmers this afternoon. We really appreciate your time. My name is Erin Garlick, and I'm the Executive Director with the Grain Growers of Canada. And I think when I think about the climate crisis and the challenges that the sector is faced with and that we're faced with around the world, I think that there are two things that Canada can contribute globally, and you've touched on one of them, and that is, and I can't claim that this is my own quote, but the world needs more Canada. When you consider that in this room you have some of the most sustainable farmers in the entire world here in this room and across this country, the more that we can grow and the more that we can export to other countries around the world, that's a great contribution that we can make to addressing the climate change crisis. One of the questions I have for you around this, I think the other contribution we can make is how are we leveraging international forums that you and the Agriculture Minister are participating in to promote the innovative and sustainable tools and practices that Canadian farmers are employing here across the country, promote those practices to other jurisdictions? That's another great contribution we could make. I'd love your take on that.
Great question, Erin. Yes, Canadian expertise really stepped up in grain shipping, for example, as Russia was blockading Ukrainian grain. The expertise we have, some of which we learned from the original Ukrainian immigrants to Canada hundreds of years ago on how to do well. Ukraine still leads on that, but it wasn't able to get those out. We played a significant role in the Black Sea Grain Initiative, working with the UN, working with Turkey, working with others to make sure that we were solving for problems, but also directly. Canada exporting grain and other agricultural products, whether it's cherries or lobsters or potatoes or what have you to the world, is a really, really important piece of support for the world that we know people are going to need. And the solutions that come with it around advances in technology are going to be key as well. I remember a few years ago visiting a vineyard that was using newfangled drone technology to map out, where the dry areas on the field were, on the vines were, and how to best optimize what it is they wanted. And I sort of said, okay, it's great that you in this fancy vineyard you have can use this, but I know it's just a matter of years before this technology becomes more available, more utilizable, and more accessible, not just to Canadians across the country in all sorts of different agricultural areas, but to the world as well, driven by Canadian innovation. And just last year, I was at the University of Saskatchewan watching drone technology used to monitor soil quality and saturation levels in a really, really impactful way. So Canada can contribute both with actual produce to the world. We can also very much contribute to the solutions and the technologies that are going to encourage and enable people to be self-sufficient around the world. In terms of conversations we're having with the world, we've done a lot of negotiating free trade deals, more than most other countries over these past years. One of the reasons why is Canada's always had more bounty, more resources than we've had a population to be able to benefit from all those resources maximally. So we've always been reliant on trade around the world. And that meant that while the world was going protectionistic a little bit over the past years, Canada continued to lean in on signing trade deals that would be beneficial to everyone, not just beneficial to the multinationals who are busy trading and have the big infrastructure for that. And that's where the conversations that we've had with countries around what are non-tariff barriers, what are fair, what are responsible, how do we move to a world that can properly support itself and feed everyone around the world, is going to continue to be a big part of it. As Canada continues to step up in Africa, as we continue to work with Asian partners that are facing crises of poverty, as we're seeing more extreme weather events coming at us around the world as well with the disruptions caused by climate change, Canada will continue to be a place that will develop solutions and share those solutions with the world. And the one big advantage whenever you show up as a Canadian NGO or a Canadian researcher, a Canadian humanitarian worker or what have you, nobody thinks Canada's there to tell you what to do or to conquer you. We're always there to help. And that role that Canadians can play in shaping the world for the better and leaning in and saying, okay, well, actually, if you take on this drip technology, if you do this soil management approach, if you try in these more resilient crops, you're going to be able to become self-sufficient, and that's what we want. We're not looking for our own narrow interests. We're looking for the well-being of everyone. That's something that Canada has both as values, but also as a reputation increasingly around the world. So how we think about what we're doing well here in Canada and how we can share with the world is going to be increasingly important, not just for the well-being of the world, but for our own well-being as well, because more stability, more prosperity, less hunger, less misery, less disasters around the world ultimately will always be good for Canada and Canadians as well. My last word today is really just thank you. Thank you for everything you do. I know it's not easy. There's no line of work that's easy these days, but day in, day out, rising with the sun, working as hard as you do, making sure you're building a strong future for yourselves, your community, your family, but also all Canadians. We don't recognize that enough. We don't thank you enough for everything that you choose to do because you love it. But we're so lucky you choose to do because Canadians need it so much. And I will continue to be an ally and a supporter and encourage everyone to understand how important everything you do is. And thank you deeply for it. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.